Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Chasing Justice podcast.
I'm Benji Monsivais, Chief of Operations at Chasing Justice.
And I am Roslyn Hernández. I am the podcast producer here at Chasing Justice. And we are your hosts for this episode. Whoop,
Hello.
whoop. I know, Sandra said she's passing the mic to like younger people and Gen Z specifically. We're sorry, we're not Gen Z. We're younger millennials. So,
Aspire to be younger, millennials. Yep.
but nonetheless, we are here for you, and we're so very glad to be sharing what we're going to
Yeah,
share in this episode.
I'm really excited about our conversation. Yeah, I think that it'll be tough shoes to fill from Sandra, but I think that's what's really special about the Chasing Justice team and community is
Mm.
that we really do each have our own perspectives and experiences to bring to the table, and so I'm excited to that we get to share those with y'all today.
Yeah, so what's the topic for today, Benji?
So today we are diving into a really fun and easy topic, talking about loving disagreement. How do we, hold space for disagreeing with others, especially as we're on a journey of justice? It's particularly relevant for this year because, of course, we're in an election year.
Yes, it's a very heated time. Um, I think social justice, the issues of social justice are present, have been present, a lot more present and explicit for a while. But this year, politics are just everywhere in our timelines, in our conversations with friends, with our coworkers, with family members. It's in the news. And yeah, we just see all the passion that people have around issues that matter to them, to all of us. And while passion is important, it can also bring a lot of tension and a lot of division, a lot of polarization, which we're seeing a lot. So, yeah, we're even with people who are trying to, bring the same goals to fruition, that
Mhm.
can also be present.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's so important for this conversation today. We're talking about how do we navigate those disagreements
Hmm.
with an attitude and approach of love and care for each other. Um, you know, Hopefully we'll be able to answer questions of, how do we engage with people when we don't necessarily see eye to eye on either the means or the ends of how to get there. How can we stay committed to the goals of justice, even when we might disagree on, how we arrive, like which political candidate we support, the organizations we support, legislation we might support, and even just beyond, how do we approach our day-to-day life decisions?
I think disagreement in like making change and in social justice is inevitable, even as you mentioned, right? Even when people are trying to go towards the same goal, but it doesn't have to derail our work. And even though it is hard, I think that maybe perhaps many of us have been feeling like shutting down in the face of disagreement. And so we just want to um, yeah, offer some practical advice, some tips and stories and hope for for all of us to stay in it and have a balance, right, of like passion and empathy, pushing forward, but also doing it in a grace in a way that shows grace not just to others but also to ourselves in this work as disagreement arises. So let's get into it.
Great. So yeah, we do want to share some tips with everyone, but first, before we kind of jump in, I wanted to know, have you felt the tension of holding space for disagreement and how? Where and how?
Where and how? Yes, I definitely have. Um, I will share kind of vaguely because I don't want to divulge who this is. But I will say that I live in California, which is a more democratic, democratic state. But I live in a part of California that tends to be more conservative and Republican. And so these more conservative ideals are around me and around some of the church people that I grew up with. And a, I, a few years ago, I was having a conversation with someone that I grew up with, and they started saying things that, oh, to me seemed very contrary to how this person grew up. It seemed and it was going more into this like conservative way of thinking, um, in ways that I think sometimes social justice movements get stereotyped in negative ways when we're trying to, fight for equality, or we're being more critical of things like appropriation, cultural appropriation, and things like that. Um, and so it was difficult for me to stay in the conversation. I will admit that I did not do a very good job at disagreeing well. Um, it was difficult to recognize that this person is not the person that I had known in the past, first of all. And second of all, it was difficult for me to realize that I was not prepared to have that kind of disagreement, and to hold space for it. Um, there was a lot going on in my body, and I think the fight or flight responses tend to sometimes get us into trouble when we go into those kinds of conversations. So that's a little bit where I'm coming from this morning or today.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with that. I think with when I was thinking about this topic, my family is, that's kind of ground zero for a lot of where those contrasts of or they're the beginning of the strongest relationships you have and the most
Mm-hmm.
intimate ones. And so when there is disagreement or tension, that's also where they're felt most deeply. Um, and so yeah, I think that that is family has been one place that those disagreements have come up quite a bit. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like you're saying, you're in an environment that's one, and then there's kind of like a smaller community within it that's kind of in contrast to it. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's when I'm most surprised, or when I get a lot of times caught off guard, when I expect to kind of get one response and then
Yes.
I'm hit kind of with a different one. I'm like, oh, whoa, that is really sometimes what catches me off guard, in having disagreement kind of conversations. Um, that, yeah, definitely, I feel that of when you get caught off guard that you're not fully prepared to have a loving, empathetic conversation, when you're not necessarily expecting it.
Right. Right. That's I think, yeah, when you're not expecting it is. So we do want to share some tips. I wonder, Benji, what has been the biggest thing that has helped you in those times or in those spaces when you've had to hold disagreement?
I think for me, when we talk about engaging politically, civic engagement, we talk about a lot about systems, and it sounds really vague.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, the most important thing is actually recognizing that it's people first that we're engaging with, whether that's people who are in political leadership, or if it's people in our family or neighborhoods. um, Whenever we're engaging with these topics, it's not a topic actually. It's a person that we're interacting with over this disagreement. And so that's been really helpful for me to think about it more from a relational lens rather than one about just my kind of ethics or my approach to society or whatever I think, society can look like. Shifting it more when I'm thinking about kind of disagreeing or having conflict, approaching it of saying, oh, there are actually people behind this that this is affecting and that I have to grapple with to, um, yeah, that I have to grapple with to kind of land my opinions, and work through them. Um, that has been, I think, a really important lens for me is approaching it as a relational question.
Yeah. I watched a webinar from Michelle Silverthorne. She is the CEO of Inclusion Nation, and she has a TED Talk called We're Not a Melting Pot. And it was about this, about how do we hold disagreement with other people. And then she titled it A More Perfect Union. And she mentioned that very thing, um, that it's a relational aspect. And that her specific way of naming this was, um, understand what this is not about.
Mm.
And she said, it's not about winning. It's not
Mm.
about you being right. It's about understanding the perspective of the other person.
Yes, 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 yes. Um, yeah, I think that's like tip number one for me for sure is like it's not about winning. I think whenever I find myself in these conversations, whether they're pre-planned, like, hey, let's have a talk about XYZ, or if
Yeah.
they are impromptu, where you find yourself kind of stumbling onto kind of a tense conversation, remembering like I am not trying to win. I am trying to pursue deeper relationship with this person sitting in front of me. Period. Like, I want to understand them. I love them. I want to listen for something that I can learn about them because I love them, or that I actually could learn from them because I respect them, like they're in my life. And actually having that lens of kind of mutual respect for each other and coupled with humility and curiosity,
Yeah.
I think has really helped to keep the relationship in front and allow the hot topic political issues to take a backseat.
Yeah, another thing that she mentioned that connects to what you're saying is, recognize your own biases and theirs, but also when you listen as if what they're saying is true. Like, because part of it is true for them in some way, right? And so listen for where it is true. And yeah, recognize that we also have biases. We have our own biases and our own blind spots. And not everybody sees the world in the same way. And I think in some sense, I think we call, like, in our mind we understand that not everyone sees the world in the same way, but don't we don't practice that. We don't practice our life in that way. We kind of go in our lives expecting everyone else to think the way that we do.
Yeah. The flip side of the coin of saying, oh, how can we uh listen to how someone else is right and what my blind spot is means I could be wrong.
Yeah.
So it's like it is a funny thing, right? To go into these art to sorry, I almost said arguments, but that's true. Sometimes there are
Yeah,
arguments, right?
sometimes. Yeah.
Having these disagreements, whenever we think we come into those like chest puffed up, I've got my facts, I have my opinions that are, my lived experience plus my facts plus my research. Like we do often get caught up in thinking that we are right, um, and that it's a black and white issue. And so
Mm.
if I am right,
Mm-hmm.
then they're wrong. Or if they have anything to say that adds nuance or gray to my experiences, like, oh, well, that's not true. And I think, yeah, we get caught up in wanting to be on the right side of that story. I think that this also reminds me of like something I've realized with my dad actually, that he's in his 70s. He
Mm.
has seen a lot of life, and we have known each other for a very long time. Um, and I am when I have conversations with him, some of which we disagree on things,
Mm.
I am constantly amazed at the multitudes he holds.
Hmm.
A lot of times I can assume things about him that, about anyone really, but I'm particularly thinking about him, about something that he might believe in, or kind of I'll pre-guess a little bit of where he might land. And truly, I am often surprised by some of the comments he says in return. I'm like, oh, that was not what I was expecting. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I think that's something that he's been a really good foil to, you know, me coming in really hot and like really strong in something and saying like, oh, well, we just don't agree because we have different worldviews. And it's like, well, but why does it have to be that I'm on one side of the line and you're on the other? Like there actually might be other things that we agree on. Even like really big hot topic things that you might actually agree with this other person. And so I think that is also helpful for me to have remembered that yeah, people can hold multitudes. People are allowed to have different opinions, just like I allow myself to have different opinions and ask other people to give me that, grace and nuance or whatever. I have to offer that to other people as well.
Yes. Oh, that is so rich. I have so many thoughts. Okay, one thing that pops up with your story about your dad is stay curious. That's one of the
Mm-hmm.
tips, right? Stay curious, and with that, don't assume or like don't make stereotypes out of people.
Yes.
And also, people might change their opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they thought one way before and they experienced something or learned something and are thinking differently afterwards. And then you mentioned you do agree on some things. And one of the things that Michelle Silverthorne mentioned in her talk was when you are having a conversation that's difficult and maybe you don't agree on a lot of things with this other person or someone else, make sure that you agree on what you agree on. Even if it's a minor point, or and make it very specific. It kind of brings more of a middle ground and it
Mm-hmm.
helps you kind of neutralize the situation a little bit more and keep that relational, because when we just go into the facts, or we just go into the talking points, it dehumanizes the other person and it keeps us from actually being curious and listening well.
Yeah. Yeah, I that makes me think of, whenever I've come into especially particularly intense disagreements,
Mm.
um, and I feel like I've kind of hit a wall in the conversation, looking at kind of peeling back the issue at hand and saying, what are the
Mm.
underlying values that I have that are driving my opinion? What are the underlying values that this other person has underneath the kind of superficial, the tip of the iceberg, topic decision, that the position that they hold? What are the underlying things that are the driving force, the engine behind their heart, behind the passion that they have? And mine too, what is the passion that is kind of behind this? And you honestly don't really have to peel that many layers
Mm.
back to find some kind of common heart behind why you're even having this disagreement. Um, because it is funny, like you'll take different positions on the topic, but when you start to interrogate, oh, well, why am I taking that position? Just one layer of asking,
Mm.
why do I feel this way for yourself and for the other person? You'll immediately find something in common that will actually bring your hearts together. Maybe not your positions, right? You're not necessarily flipping, trying to convince the other person of your position or the other way around, but actually having a tighter, yeah, more intimate heart connection with them
Mm.
because there is a shared value underlying, why you're feeling so fiery in the first place.
Yeah, and we're talking about like relational aspects. I think there's on the other side a personal aspect to this as well, is that it doesn't help us to stay in our echo chambers, to sharpen our ideas. And as you said, really peel back those layers and ask ourselves, what is it that I actually believe? What's driving my passion here? And when you encounter someone who doesn't agree with you or who holds different perspectives, you're having to articulate what it is that you believe or your values are, and your ideas, and having, and it reminds me of that verse in the Bible, iron sharpens iron. It isn't these like shocks in these kind of violent metaphor, right? Of like metal hitting each other but becoming sharper, that sometimes we grow in our own stance or even in our own values, and even in communicating what it is that we believe.
Mhm. Yeah, you're talking about essentially holding yourself accountable
Mm.
to being able to be self-aware enough, being self-aware enough to know what you believe, knowing why you believe it, whether that's because, of facts or scripture or whatever to back it up, um, and the possibility of what we said earlier, potentially actually being wrong, and being willing to take a step back. That accountability question is key, I think, actually, in balancing and yeah, and balancing these interactions to be a little bit more even-handed. The thing that, in terms of accountability, what that reminds me of is, or something that I try to remind myself to do, is after I have these conversations, when you hang up the phone or walk away, to continue to reflect on it, um, and remember that you definitely misstepped at some point. And to pick up that phone again or come back to the person and apologize.
Mm.
Hey, I said something that I've been really thinking about again, and I, maybe you don't remember or whatever, but that was really, it kind of just kept on sticking with me, and I wanted to apologize for saying it in that way. Or, hey, that was really interesting that you said that. Can you tell me a little bit more? Because I think I might have misunderstood. That part of accountability of actually revisiting a a tense conversation, um, can actually be, again, another touch point that doesn't
Yeah.
have to leave the relationship in ruins, because you've disagreed on a topic, but it actually creates a jumping off point for continued expressions of humility and mutual respect for each other.
That is so good. I'm glad we're talking now, moved into like what happens after you have a, hard conversation. I have two things. Along with what you just mentioned, let's say that you're just having the conversation and you're just finishing, just acknowledging and saying thank you to that person. Thank you for listening, or, acknowledging that it's a hard topic. Like, I know this is hard. I know we don't agree on things, but thanks for having this conversation with me. Even if we ended up, almost yelling at each other, or if we ended up having to stop because we
Mm.
couldn't, if things were getting very tense, acknowledging that someone has stepped into a hard place with you is really important. And then afterwards, it's okay to decompress. These are conversations that take a lot of energy, and that, as I mentioned in the beginning, sometimes they put us into fight or flight mode. And so take care of yourselves. Take a deep breath, go take a walk. As you mentioned, keep processing it. Think about your values and what matters to you, and keep that accountability. Did I show the values that I say that I represent or that I want to represent? Or maybe go talk to someone else, process that encounter. Yeah, I think one big one for me is going for a walk or getting some physical movement, because the fight or flight is real, and sometimes you just need to shake it out, and 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 get out of that like anxiety mode that the conversation might have put you in. All right, so let's do a little recap of what we just said, because we said a lot of things. These are not all of the things that we mentioned, but these are the ones that are on top of our head that we want to summarize for you all. So go ahead, take it away, Benji.
So we started off first by saying we need to prioritize the relationship
Hmm.
over the position that you're taking.
It's not about winning.
It's not about winning. It truly is about finding and investing in the relationship that you find yourself in right there.
Staying curious, listening with mutual respect. We shouldn't just see people as a stereotype. We should listen and acknowledge that they are complex individuals just as we are.
We also talked about finding something. We also talked about finding the things that you agree on and agreeing on them. Whether those are minor pieces that you share the same platform on, or if they're underlying values that you discover through the conversation that you share to celebrate those.
Yes, so we also mentioned being intentional about how you end those conversations or how you close them, saying thank you, appreciating and recognizing that those conversations are hard, and then afterwards apologizing if you need to apologize, or coming back and opening more space to have to keep having that relationship regardless of the difference in perspectives.
And last but not least, decompressing a bit afterwards, definitely reinvesting in your soul, because it does take effort to have those conversations, whether that's decompressing with a person, with a friend, or decompressing by yourself. That this is relational work, it is mental work, it is emotional work. And so it really is helpful to take that time to decompress, to fill yourself back up for the next time.
Yeah, and just a little bit of encouragement. And this is what this season is about, and what we are trying to do here at CJ is to let you all know that it's okay to be in process. We are all learning and engaging in this journey, and we don't arrive. And we're always going to be learning from our mistakes, learning from others, learning from the hard conversations that we're having, even when we're disagreeing. So don't be afraid. It's okay. We are all in process. All right, friends. Well, that's it. That's all we have for you today. I hope that this conversation got you thinking about how you can approach disagreement with a little bit more grace for yourself and for others, and a little bit more understanding. Remember that we're on this journey together, even if we disagree on how we're going to get to the end goal.
Before you go, wherever you're listening on, we want to hear from you. So, whatever platform you're listening on, drop us a comment, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify. Um, share a little bit about what's been your experience in navigating disagreement, especially around hot topic or social justice issues. We want to keep that conversation going.
Yes, let's keep the conversation going. And if you haven't already, do all the things that will help the algorithm. Share, like, make sure you hit the follow button, subscribe, all of the things so that you don't miss another episode of the Chasing Justice podcast. And yeah, let's spread the word and keep building that community of change makers.
Thank you so much for tuning in, listening to our conversation. Stay engaged, stay curious, listen to each other, and let's keep chasing justice together, everyone. Catch you next
Okay.
time.
Bye. See ya. Catch you on the flip side. Although that's not very Gen Z, that's like way
I was
old.
gonna say, yeah.